Go on in. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay.
Morning all, hope everybody is well. It's a fine morning here in the Lincolnshire Wolds and we'll do a quick dog walk video. I'm not sure how long will be. The dog looks fairly invested at the moment, so we might get half an hour out of it. We shall see. So yesterday was a busy day in the world of Lincoln City. You wait kind of 3-4 weeks and there's not an awful lot happened, a couple of sign-ins, but not heard an awful lot more, and then all of a sudden bang bang bang, significant things start to happen. And for me there were 3 significant things yesterday. So we'll start at the start. We'll start with the first arrival, which was Tashan Oakley-Booth. He signed on a year-long deal from Stoke City. Now, a lot of people on social media have put things like, "Wow, what a great signing this is for Lincoln City," but the fact is, it's the champ man generation, as I call it, football manager now, where you may recognise the name. None of us have seen Tashan play. Let's be honest. I mean, he might have played 14 times in the Championship for Stoke. 2 of those were starts, which is decent pedigree. At least he's got the senior football experience. He's kind of the same level as TJ's obviously come through the same youth setup at Spurs, played for England at under 17 level in the World Cup. So it looks on paper to be a good signing. Now, to give some of you a little bit of an insight about something that's coming up, and I'll relate this back in a moment. Last night, Ben, Jake, and I hosted a live podcast with Mark Kennedy. It was a raffle prize for some supporters who had left their money in the club and entered the big raffle, the one where Ben, or rather Rachel, won the executive box. So we hosted that. And we got to talk to Mark Kennedy. It's brilliant. It's going to go out tomorrow, maybe even later on today. We shall see. It's a must listen. Absolutely. I could have chatted to Mark all evening. But we asked him about Tashan, and just as a kind of a taster, he suggested that it's a player who he had an eye on from his early days as a coach. So he was at Wolves as a coach. I think Rob Edwards, who was at Forest Green, he's just recently left Forest Green. Can't think where he's gone to manage, but anyway, Mark stepped up, and his Wolves team came up against Tashan, and he said he basically started making a note at that point because he knew he wanted to be a head coach, he wanted to be a number 1, so he made a note at that point of players to keep an eye on. Tashan was the first name, or one of the first names that he on his list, and when you listen to Mark, you'll realise he's not one for hyperbole, he's not one for kind of big outlandish statements. So what we're talking about here is actually Lincoln City had already identified this player. We were already some way down the line with hoping that we could get him in, and Mark Kennedy's then come in and gone, that's a player that I want as well. So whilst Paddy O'Connor was the number 1 target, I think that's obvious. And again, from anyone that I don't know if we talk about it on the podcast or if it was the early presentation, but basically we knew what we needed with O'Connor. We needed power, we needed height, we needed strong defending, that sort of thing, a leader. But Tashan was the type of player, the exact player that Mark Kennedy had identified many moons ago, before he even thought about moving to Lincoln and managing or head coach of Lincoln City. So I think it's a big signing in that respect. I'm not going to say, he's a great player because we haven't seen him. And Dan and Lunderloo last season on paper looked like a super signing. And he wasn't able to do it. What I think Tashan has that perhaps some people did, certainly Dan did not really have, was enough senior experience. When you look at Tashan, it isn't all being brought on in like 86 minutes. He's been brought on 55 minutes. So he's been playing 40 minutes here, an hour there. Last season, things stuttered for him a little bit. He didn't play at Stoke. The new manager didn't fancy him. He turned down a loan to Burton Albion. So he was a player, I think, that has got to just kickstart a little bit. But from what Mark was saying last night, he's certainly got the ability to kickstart his career. I think Tashan Oakley-Booth is the Lewis Fiorini replacement. I don't like to say that, but he's the Lewis Fiorini. He's the Joe Morrell of years gone by. He's that lone player that's going to be kind of box to box, good on the ball. He's exactly what we need. Now, we do need another type of player, which brings me to my next bit of news. Liam Bridcut departs the club. Absolutely no shock for me from Michael Appleton leaving. Now, I was convinced we would offer Liam Bridcut a new deal, which we did. Had Michael Appleton stayed, no doubt in my mind whatsoever, Liam Bridcut signs that deal. no doubt whatsoever. Michael goes, and having interviewed Liam, I know with the respect he had for Michael, he was one of the main drivers that brought Liam to the club. Michael was. So I had absolutely no confidence that he'd sign a new deal. So to hear that he'd gone was a surprise. Look, Liam Bridcut's a really, really good footballer. He was very, very good the time he spent on the pitch for Lincoln City. It just wasn't enough. Last season it was, I think, 14 starts in the league and one in the cup, perhaps. And yeah, I don't care whether he's a high earner, a low earner, whatever. I just feel, if you're needed for 46 games, because not every player is, some players might play 14 games and they don't get picked for 30 of them. And then you can't say to them, 14 games isn't enough for that player. If you're needed for 46 games and you can only play 20% of those games, that's whatever you earn, it's unfortunately not sustainable. So I would love to have seen him stay around the club, and I think I said this in a video or certainly in a blog that if he were to do that, I'd want it to be as a coach and a player, or a pay-as-you-play deal with coaching options. I think Liam Bridcut's a great professional. I think he's a person that drives standards. I think that he's had a great career. I think he will continue to have a good career, whether that's on the pitch with the League One side or whether it's as a part of a backroom staff, I don't know. Lots of talk that he is training with Derby County at the minute. Wouldn't surprise me. I think he'll remain in the East Midlands. Wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't go to a club like Derby, where they perhaps need that little bit of leadership and togetherness. Absolutely nothing bad to say about Liam Bridcut. We just didn't see enough of him while we were here. It was like the time I bought. I'll liken it to. I'll do a metaphor. It's like the time I bought a Golf GTI. I'd always wanted a Golf GTI. I'm not a big car person, but I always liked the Golf, and the GTI struck me, and I'm buying it. And I was so pleased with it. I was so pleased with it. But the insurance was sky high. Fuel, it got like 20 to the gallon, and I think it broke down on me 3 times. And at the end of the day, when I got rid of it, I had a Golf GTI. It was brilliant that I owned one, but it was far more practical for me to have something a little bit different. So Liam Bridcut was for a short while our Golf GTI. I think it was a Mark III. Yeah, not the current models. And now he's gone. That's a vitally important position for us to fill. I think Harry Jackson has just commented on it now. Both the CDMs are leaving. Hopefully we can go in for Alex Gorin or use Lass as a CDM like you recently wrote. Alex Gorin has signed a new deal at Oxford United, so he's going nowhere. I don't think Lass is that same person. Lass is a hard working footballer, and I think that he will be better this year. He has to be better this year. But I think we sign a central defensive midfielder, but we shall see. Now, I think the third bit of business that happened yesterday, Mike Garrity coming in as the assistant head coach, is the most important piece of business of the day. And perhaps at the end of the season, if Tashan has got player of the year, hindsight will prove me wrong. They say there's a saying, isn't it? Behind every good man, there's a great woman, something like that. Behind every great manager, there's an even better number 2. And you think about some of the people from history. I mean, if my mate Pete was watching this, he'd talk about number 2s like Brian Kidd all day long. Not made to be a number 1, made to be a number 2. Absolutely vital to what the club went on to achieve. And at Blackpool, there are a number of Blackpool fans who were very, very wary of Neil Critchley when he first went in, until he appointed himself his assistant head coach. Until he appointed himself, I think even Colin Calderwood went in. I might be wrong about that, but until he had the right support, because every good number 1 needs a number 2. It's not saying the number 1's not good enough, but it's saying that double acts, where one is the quiet worker, are probably better. And you think about Nicky and Danny Kelly. Okay, they were brothers. They split their money, all that sort of stuff. Danny was the main man. Danny was the manager. But Nicky was there. He did plenty behind the scenes, the kind of quiet force. We think back to Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson's best spell as Lincoln City manager was when he had Neil McDonald behind him. Now, Neil McDonald has since failed elsewhere as a manager himself, but he was vital to the football club. I think we didn't see a lot of David Kerslake. I don't know what Kerr's brought to the table. I think that's fair to say, and that's not being negative towards him. But he obviously brought something, because he's been taken to Blackpool. So Mike Garrity coming in, or first of all, the assistant head coach was a vital role, which perhaps people just kind of go, oh, well, who's the assistant manager? And that's what we'll refer to it as. well, we've got an assistant manager, that's great, we needed one. Whereas actually the skill set that that person brings in and the role that that person is going to play within Lincoln City's success is far greater than the importance placed upon it by supporters. I've been pessimistic a little bit over the last couple of weeks. Yesterday changed that, and I'll come on to another reason shortly. But part of that is because I didn't see where, I didn't know, we didn't know who Mark Kennedy's assistant was going to be. Not that I don't trust Mark Kennedy. No, that's not the case at all. But a good football club relies not on a manager or a head coach, but on a management team or a coaching team. And getting that appointment right was just critical. You look at Mike Garrity's experience, coming through, I think, however many, 13 years is it at Liverpool, working with some very, very talented footballers, working in passing, working in the sort of coaching drills that we're going to need to implement in order to keep our approach consistent. He then struck out, he went abroad. And then I spoke to a Blackpool fan yesterday, Tom Main, friend of mine, and he basically said that although you never really know what the assistant does in Mike Garrity, what you can only assume is that he was the assistant manager when they were promoted, or he was the assistant head coach while they were promoted. So he played a vital role in that. And I think if you were to have said to me at the beginning of last season, would you swap David Kerslake for Mike Garrity, I put the two side by side. The greatest of respect to Kers, I would probably have said yes, because I get the feeling that Mike Garrity is the kind of coach of the future. It's the way that the type of approach that we're going with the head coach. That's what you need. I think rather than, and with the great, again, I keep saying with the greatest respect to Kers, I didn't really know what he did, but you don't have to have the illustrious playing career. And Mike Garrity's got the illustrious coaching career, and we're going very much with a coaching model. And anybody who listens to the podcast or who was lucky enough to see the exclusive bit beforehand for the raffle winners, where Jez and Mark went through kind of the club structure, knows the heavy emphasis we have on coaching. Let me tell you, I picked my dad up yesterday. We did the Mark Kennedy event, which I'll talk about to you in a second. Picked my dad up yesterday, and I hadn't spoken to him since before. Well, I had spoken to him, not seen him since we went on holiday 2 weeks ago. And there was just this air of, we've only signed 3 players, and players that we've talked about, like Richie Smallwood, he's gone to Bradford. He would have been great at thinking that midfield role. And you look at, James Norwood's going to Bristol Rovers, and this is happening and that's happening, and is Morgan Whitaker not coming back, and Anthony Scully's being bid for. And it's easy to get pessimistic. And me and Dad basically sat in the car, and we were talking a little bit about the season. And I was saying I think 20th would be, I'd be happy with that as things stand. We've got a half decent squad, but we just lack certain elements. I think certain elements will come in. Just need something to kickstart my belief. And I am a pessimist, but I also always try and see both sides. And Mike Garrity coming in was that spark for me. It really was, because it completed the off the field framework. And this is going to sound, people might shoot me down for this. Feel free. Very few League One teams will sign bad footballers this summer. Very, very few. Because there are that many footballers out there, whether it's coming to the end of their under-23 pathway, whether it's coming up from non-league, whether it's coming up from League Two, whether it's players that have struggled in Championship coming down. None of these are going to be bad footballers. If they were, they wouldn't be making a living from football. Just ask anybody who played at a youth level. Ask anybody who's played at Lincoln United's level. Bad footballers don't make professionals. Every footballer that's a professional footballer today is a good footballer. They might not play well for a team. They might not have the right attitude, but they're all good footballers. Lincoln City will sign, every player Lincoln City signs will be a good footballer. They might not work out. They might not be the right footballer for us, but that's their profession, and somebody will have put the trust in them. So by that rationale, you could almost sign anybody. They've got to fit in with your framework. You can't sign a central midfielder to play at left back. You can't sign a defensive left back if you're playing 3-5-2 and going to play with a high left back. I get that. But if you go out for a defensive midfielder and you sign a defensive midfielder, and that defensive midfielder has come from the Championship or has come from an under-23 pathway, they will be a good footballer. All the coach And the assistant coach and the rest of the team have got to do is create the environment when that footballer plays their best football. And if you do that, you're a success. And chatting to my friend Richard Godson last night, and he said something kind of along the same lines, which I've briefly and temporarily forgotten now. My apologies. In that, it's all about how you kind of coach these players. It's how about you get the best out of these players, and ultimately becoming far greater than the sum of your parts. And that was a big thing with Keith in 2002 and 2003. He was signing footballers that other people had deemed to be bad footballers. Mark Bailey had been cast aside, I think, by Rochdale and ended up at Northwich. Stuart Bimson had floated around a little bit. He was picking up non-league players like Simon Yeo, who was delivering post on a Monday morning before playing for Hyde. But the environment and the coaching that they put together and the approach that they put together meant that team then got to a playoff final ahead of teams such as Darlington. I think we're in our division that year, might be wrong. Bristol Rovers, those sorts of teams that spent a lot of money that season. And it might not be those two teams, but there'd be teams that year that spent money that didn't go up or didn't get promoted. That's the key. We'll sign good footballers. Charles Vernon, good footballer. Paddy O'Connor, whether he's right or wrong, he's a good footballer. I think he's a right player. Same with Tashan. Didn't play last season, but doesn't mean he's a bad footballer. It means that Stoke didn't fancy him. So that's why Mike Garrity was absolutely, completely and utterly vital to this football club and to the success or the ongoing success of the football club next season. And what will success look like? For me, anything above 17th is success, because that's where we finished last season, so it's an improvement. And anything above 20th, with the greatest respect, isn't an awful, awful season. We finished 20th, 4 teams go down, we don't. You springboard again next year. I expect, with the signings that we hopefully will make and the framework we've got in place, I think that sort of just finishing above 17th is achievable next season. You're not going to get me saying we're going to finish in the playoffs. You only have to look at some of the teams that we've got to play and some of the money they're spending and the budgets that we're coming up against. To finish in the playoffs would be unbelievable, but it's not going to happen. It happened 2 years ago because budgets were much more compact because of the the wage cap which came in and then was taken out. Were there a wage cap in and teams had to work under similar constraints, I think that Lincoln City would be in a more favourable position. But we are now where we are. This is football. It's settled back down. Everybody's forgotten COVID. Overspending has started again amongst teams. It's why the Championship, it's a stagnant market in the Championship. Very few players move to Championship clubs for fees because everybody's struggling. And unfortunately, we have to make the best with what we've got. And if we finish above 17th, I think that'll be a decent season. I think with Mike Garrity on board, I think that's more likely. Okay, so let's move forward then. I missed the Mike Garrity news. Basically, I was travelling to Sinsel Bank. There was an event last night. It was originally billed for raffle winners as a meet the manager event. And this was, I think, 2 summers ago now. So the planned event, when the COVID kicked in, I actually contacted Liam Scully and said, look, if you want to offer a raffle prize of attending a live podcast recorded by myself and Ben with Michael Appleton, we'd be willing to come in and do that. And so it was put on as a meet the manager event where people who kept their money in the club entered the raffle, and it was one of the prizes. If your name was drawn out against this prize, you could come along. I don't think it was billed as me and Ben. We certainly weren't the headline acts, but and Jake subsequently as well. But we were going to host this event with Michael Appleton, like the 100th podcast that we did. We did a live podcast, you might remember, and it was going to be meet the manager. And then the manager changed, and the club found it. Just want to turn around, Charlie, going back, boy. Obviously, the club then scheduled it for last night. It was quite short notice, to be fair. I think it was about 2-3 weeks ago. They contacted and said, are you able to do it? It's a great opportunity for us to meet Mark Kennedy, a great opportunity to reward those fans who won the prize and who left their money in the club. So that was what we did. Now, it took a kind of a 3 parts. So the first part was specifically just for the night. We didn't record, where Jez and Mark talked about club structure and they talked about the recruitment policy. 45 minutes. Anyone who's ever known Jez do a presentation knows that means a bare minimum of 1 hour and 20, which is I think what it ran to. Fascinating stuff. Could listen to Jez and Mark talk about the football club structure all night. Really, really good. And then myself and Ben recorded a live podcast with Mark Kennedy. That'll be out later today. Ben's just messaged me while we're recording. So that will be out on the Podbean later today. And then the second part of the podcast will be the Q&A from the floor. 6 or 7 questions from people who were at the event, just clearing up a few points. So, and yes, you'll be delighted to know that somebody did ask, are we going to leave a man up at corners? Thanks for that, Chris Keneally. So it was a good event, really good. First opportunity to get face to face with Mark Kennedy. Probably quite lucky in that we were one of the first, dare I say, media outlets. You know, is that what we are? One of the first media outlets to have that kind of unfettered access, and it was a real honour. And you got more of a, I think, more of a flavour of the type of person that Mark Kennedy is. And it's inevitable that he's always going to be kind of held up and compared to previous managers. In terms of personality, there are some very stark differences between Mark and Michael, the party manager. I get the impression from Mark he is, I'm not going to say, it's a different type of focus. There's an air of professionalism about Mark. There's a certainty about Mark. There was no bold promises when you listen to the podcast. There's no headlines. There's no, I want to get to the championship. I want to do this. I want to do that. There's just this steely determination within him. I've always wanted to be a number one. I've always known I'm a number one. When I went into Birmingham City, I told Lee Bowyer, I'm a number one, not a number two. And it's not an arrogant claim he makes, and you can listen to it yourself. It's a certain claim. There's never been any doubt in Mark Kennedy's mind where he wanted to be. And in that respect, there's a similarity, I think, with Danny Cowley. And Danny always used to say, we know the journey we're on. Are you on it with us? You remember that? Always used to say that. We know where we're going. I don't think that was ultimately Portsmouth, but it was, you know, the championship where they managed. Now, Mark, again, is very different to Danny, but there's that same determination. There's that same, I knew where I was going. And it'll come across, I think, that the club had to be as much of a fit for Mark Kennedy as Mark Kennedy was for the club. That kind of goes without saying, it does. But I think there were some people that were worried a little bit that when Michael came in, there was an element of, aren't little Lincoln City lucky to get Michael? I'm not saying that necessarily came from him, because, you know, he was such a respected individual when he came in, and he'd been, you know, linked with so many other jobs before that when we got him and people were coming and saying, I'm coming to play for Michael, I'm coming to play for Michael. And it did feel to some, and I'm not saying that was me, but to some, you know, like when Kurz came in, I've come for Michael. Liam Bridcut comes in, I've come, you know, for Michael, and then talked about how good the club was. Mark Kennedy hasn't come for Mark Kennedy, he's come for Lincoln City, and he makes that very, very clear. And when I talked to him, I think about Mike Garrity in the podcast, and again, you know, I don't want to spoilers, but it's like it's not that he's bringing his mates in. He hadn't worked with Mike before. He's bringing in people to work for Lincoln City, and it's hard to put it. You'll understand when you listen, but Mark Kennedy is a respected coach, and you only have to listen to the podcast and understand, you know, where he's been and the people he's worked with, and he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to name drop. He talks about a world-class coach who was on his, who did his badges at the same time, who he refuses his name, just doesn't name him. He doesn't refuse. He just says, I'm not, you know, I won't say who it is. I talked to him about the managers that he's worked under, and it's a who's who of kind of English and British managers. Mick McCarthy, Dave Jones, Peter Taylor, Glenn Hoddle, the list goes on. He's very, very, he says there's some I've enjoyed working under, some I haven't. He's not a name dropper. Not really that interested in talking about his playing career. I will do at some point, he says, but it's not relevant now. Very, very focused man. I think that's important. I think that there is a danger when picking a new head coach that you look at the Wikipedia page, you look at previous experience, and you go, Mark Kennedy, you know, he's only won one game as a manager when he was at Macclesfield, and they got, you know, they were relegated. I kept them up, but they were relegated. And then you listen to him talk, and then you watch the presentation, and I granted that's not available for everybody, and I'm sure the club will put another event on like that, where he goes through the coaching and he goes through patterns of play, and he was very, very in depth yesterday. And I tell you something, when he started doing it, and he got his board up, he got his projector up, and he was saying, this is where we want to play, and this is a typical pattern that you'll see us play, and he demonstrated that. And when he was sat talking, first of all, he came across as not quiet and reserved, but he didn't feel like a big character. He was sat on the chair. Jez was saying, turning to him every so often, and he's intelligent, and he was very focused, and he was very sure of his answers, and he was very measured. But he came to life when it was, let's talk tactics, because he got up and he was the manager. And he says something along the lines of, I don't like gaffer, I don't like manager, I don't like any of that, I'm just a guy like you. He goes, who does the job. But trust me, he came to life, and very, very passionate man about the way he wants to play, very passionate about the fact that aligns with Lincoln City. And it was interesting. I think it's hard sometimes to gain an idea of what somebody is like purely from a Zoom interview, purely from a press interview. He's very engaging with press. He laughs, he'll laugh and have a joke, but there's always that steel underneath that. He's got a job to do, he's here to do it. Ben tried to talk to him about what he did out of work, and it was almost like, nothing really, I'm just I'm a football manager and that sort of thing. I became more convinced. That's not to say I was particularly doubting Mark Kennedy. I wasn't going to doubt the football club's recruitment process, because they're the experts, and I'm not, and none of us are, none of our supporters. I think when you look at records, and there's so much punditry around football now, so many experts out there who cover Division 3 or League 2 and League 1, or they cover certain clubs, or they cover certain areas, and everybody's got an opinion. And there are so many sites like the 72 and Football League World that are constantly putting out content, and a lot of it's opinion pieces, and a lot of those opinion pieces are so quickly put together that they are surface level content, as my boss calls some of the work that we do, or that I used to put in that got rejected. It really is just, it's like scraping up the surface, putting that in an article and banging it out there, and there isn't the deeper dig. And that's what we got with Mark last night. Is we scraped off the surface, we scraped off the Macclesfield. We know about that, but tell us about it. Tell us about it properly, not just 12 games, 1-1, and they ended up getting relegated and were skinned. Why? What did you learn from that? Where did you go from there? Why? Not why did you take a step back to the youth, but how was it? What did you learn? Where did that come in your overall thinking? When did you want to be a head coach? Was it at Birmingham? Was it when Birmingham struggled last season, or is that always something you want to do? And we really got kind of underneath, I think. Sounds a bit dodgy, but we got underneath Mark Kennedy. It was more than just the name. Never talked about his time at Liverpool, really. Mentioned the white suits, but never really talked about his playing career, because that's not him anymore. It'd be like talking to me about Howdens and Jacksons or rather talking to me about Poacher when I've just taken up a writing job covering Lincoln City for a newspaper, for instance. Would be related, be part of the journey, but not really a part of the journey that would make me who I am. Listen to the podcast. Look, I'm going on about it. I'm commenting and giving you feedback on something you can't even listen to yet, but it'll come out. It'll come out later on today. Well worth it. We had a lot of fun. Really good guy, and I think anybody that gets a number one job, unless you're John Yems or like really old school, I think the new breed of coaches understand about fan engagement. They understand about. They have to be a personality. The brave new world of Twitter and social media means everything is under scrutiny. News is instant. You can't bury a bad story on the newspaper. It's in social media within a minute. And so therefore, I think head coaches and managers are far more aware of how they come across than they ever were before. And I think of all the managers that we've had going back that I've known and I've interviewed, I think Mark Kennedy probably comes across as most aware of that. And Danny Cowley was very good at creating his public persona, And I'm not saying that wasn't what Danny was like, but you knew, Danny he knew what was needed, and he performed that role. He knew that we needed people who turned up at, girls' games coaching, or that would stand and talk to you in the supermarket, or that would do this and that. He needed to repair and build a football club beyond what Chris Moyes had already started. Michael, very, very good coach. I don't think he quite got that, the other area of the football club. He was who he was, did very well for us. Mark Kennedy has more of an awareness and an understanding, I think, of the role beyond coaching and football, of the wider club. You'll see for yourself. You'll hear it. You'll get to meet him. Loads of people getting selfies with him last night. Hugh's the sort of person that'll be posing for those. I think he'll come over and applaud the fans at the end of a defeat. I think he'll make himself accessible and accountable. Okay, so let's have a quick look through some of these comments before we go. So evening Sam, evening Chris, Owen, good morning, hope you're well. Jake Tong, where's that gone? I will have to pay, I'll have to mention this. Jake says, hello community, hello Red Imps Trust Community Fan of the Year, Community Trust Fan of the Year. I was incredibly humbled last night to be awarded the Red Imps Community Trust Fan of the Season for last season, which I always say no fan's better than another. We all support the club in our own way. We all do what we can where we can. We all love the club. We all want the best for the club, even though we'll argue about it. Humbling, incredibly humbling to know that people out there have chosen to nominate me for Red Imps Community Trust Fan of the Year. One person's already messaged me this morning and said, I nominated you. I hope that's okay. And then the Red Imps Trust Board chose to give me the award this year. Imtunes, Chris Ray, good friend of mine, won it last year. So I've won that. First award I've ever won. Actually, I've been to the blogging awards and never won. And it do you know what? It took me by surprise. I was told to, because I'd kind of compared the evening a little bit, and I was told to sort of introduce what was going to happen, and then can you just bring Rob Bradley on, who's come to make a presentation to somebody, but they didn't tell me that the presentation was being made to me. So I brought Rob Bradley on and then went and sat down, and within about, I think, 30 seconds of him talking, I kind of thought, oh, actually, do you know what this is? I think this is for me. And I'd gone from a little bit nervous about how the night was going to go to I don't know. A lot of people say really nice things about the blog, and I struggle to deal sometimes with it because I don't want to come across as arrogant. When people say you do a good job with a blog, and I'm going to go, yeah, I do, don't I? Because it comes across as arrogant, and there's a lot of other people that are involved in it. So it's very humbling. Obviously, really delighted to get the award, and just thanks to everybody who supports the blog, who supports the videos, who does tireless work for us, the likes of Ben and Jake and Malcolm and Tom Morton and everybody who's ever written anything for the site. You're as much a part of what we do as I am. I facilitate it, I built the site up, but it's very much a kind of a community asset, which is quite nice to win the Community Trust Award. And just thank you to the Priory Academies as well, because as I understand it, some of the nominations were around the work that I do mentoring younger writers, and it's an incredibly rewarding experience for me. I do it every year. We've done it remotely, we've done it in person, we've built it up. So Gary Slight and Ian Jones at the Priory, have also played a big part in that. So thank you very much. Okay. Thanks to David Ward, he's on board this morning. Thanks to Mr. Freeston, who was part of the party that ambushed me yesterday. Owen Dawson, I echo these thoughts about the CDM role. I see Sanders playing that role long term. Needs an experienced player to come in. Possibly, it's experience. It really is experience that we need, I think, in that position. Morning to Gav Hughes. Excellent appointment yesterday, but got it about Bridcourt. Yes, me too, but it is what it is. Babs Landemore, good morning. Reece Marshall, do you think we're likely to get a big name signing for this season? I don't, actually. I don't. I think we'll get a name we recognise, but I don't think there'll be the big name signing. And what is a big name? James Norwood, because we all know who he is, big name. Jody Jones, is he a big name? Is Jody Jones, who's been out 3 times with his ACL, any better than Tashan Oakley Booth? Just because we haven't seen Tashan in action in the Championship, I don't know. Nick Oxbury, morning, my friend. Mike Garrity surely helps seal the loan easy one from top Premier League clubs. I think Mark Kennedy says that he has a lot of friends who work as under 23 loan managers. I don't think that there's any issue whatsoever with us sealing loans from certain big clubs. How do you think Mark Kennedy would get the best out of Chris Maguire? Well, if rumours are to be believed, it's by giving him one of those little locks to put on his suitcase to keep his stuff in check while he moves away. So we'll see if that happens or not. Haven't seen Chris Maguire in any of the training videos. Talented footballer. It's all about attitude for me. All about attitude. Jerry Brown, first time he's watched live. Welcome on board, Jerry. I hope you're having a good morning, my friend. Chris Cadilli, load of smiley faces. I think we know what that's about. Do we leave someone up at corners? And Andy Blackburn, morning, pal. Hope you're all right. New signing looks like it could be good for us. So that's where we are. There is a little bit of chat further up, actually, and about assistants. Brian Clough, Peter Taylor. Clough was nothing without Peter Taylor. Jacko had Neil McDonald for a period too. It's that 1-2. It's that double act. Sometime everybody makes mistakes. Everybody will make a call that's the wrong call. Mark Kennedy will make one. Liam Scully admitted last night that they've made the wrong call on rare occasions. Everybody does it. The key is having somebody to bounce those ideas off. Because if you've got a filter, say you make one bad decision in 100. If you've got an assistant and you bounce all of those 100 decisions off him, he might pick up on the one bad decision that you're going to make. He might talk you into making a bad decision. But the point is, two heads are better than one. And I'm really, really thrilled that Mike Garrity's come on board. Genuinely am. I'm not going to say I knew a huge amount about him before yesterday. I'm looking at the CV. I'm looking at where he's worked. I think he's a big signing for this football club. I really do. And I think some of the best signings that we ever make are off the field. And when you look at the likes of Danny and Nicky Cowley, probably the two signings that were acted as a catalyst for this football club to kick on. Then when they left and the money that came in for them, they acted as a catalyst for change within the football club. They brought a lot of money to us. So best signings can sometimes be the ones you don't know. Did you know Joe Hutchinson? He's part of the scouting team. You hear about Mark Tracy and Joe Hutchinson. No relation. And this came up in the Jez interview. So just a little bit to finish on. Joe is kind of a performance analyst. So he watches videos of the players. He puts together the portfolios to present to the manager, and the manager can then pick the players out of those portfolios that he thinks most fit and all that sort of stuff. And you kind of think, he's coming from college to work under Mark Tracy. No, he was the senior performance analysis for England when they won the World Cup in the Under-17 World Cup. So we've got somebody there who has worked for his country to the sort of level where he's not just done well, they've won the World Cup. He's worked analysing performance of the likes of Jadon Sancho and Phil Foden and TJ Ioma. And I think Teo Edden, was he a part of that? Potentially, I don't know. And Tashan Oakley-Booth. You don't know about Joe Hutchinson. I'm right about the club. I'm making my business to know. Until last night, I didn't know he'd done that. So there's a signing who none of us really know about, who is clearly playing an important part in everything that the club do backstage. So easy, isn't it? When things are going well to go, just George, director of football, he's not doing a particularly good job, let's get rid. No, we know nothing about how this football club works. Nothing. It's like an iceberg under the ocean. You see the bit that pokes out. You don't see how deep it runs. You don't see how strong it is. Mark Kennedy's come for that. And that is why I've got a degree of confidence that Lincoln City can continue to be a League One side. Just because we're not signing the big name striker, just because we haven't signed George Grant, which runs to Hearts, as everybody wanted, just because we might not sign this player or that player, it doesn't mean we're in a bad place. I feel a lot more energised today. I feel a lot more positive today. And it's not just because I had a massive ego boost, and thank you very much for that, but it's just genuinely, it revitalised me. I struggled to sleep. I sat up at 12:30 last night wanting to do this video. I hope that you feel the same way too. And I hope that the next 4 weeks continue to reinforce and build that, so that when Exeter City come on July the 30th, we've got Pax Insel Bank, believing that a top half in League One is achievable and attainable. Sorry, I'm just crossing a road. So, Charlie, come on, let's go. Look, thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. I've got a busy day on now. Probably won't finish work until about 8 o'clock at night. But I really do appreciate all of your support that helped kind of lead to the award last night. I hope that you appreciate the content, and we'll speak again soon. Take care. Goodbye.